Actually, I would like clarify about the opt-in and opt-out. Usually, when they say the opt-in system, so your record will not go to the national database unless you really give the consent.
Yeah.
But the opt-out, which is in England and Scotland, your record will go there unless you decide not to have them there. So usually here they send the letters. Actually, I rent a house, but also I received the letter of the actually landlord, which who is actually not in this country. In this case, actually his records will go automatically to the system. Maybe he doesn't want to do that, and nothing could just tell like, okay, he could decide or not.
So what do you think?
Actually, it's not ethical. And like for me, actually, we did a study about this. So if I have some actually privacy problems and some confidential information, or for some reason or another, I know exactly. Yet there's no actually very strong audit system to really control who is going to access my records. And if this happened, what will happen? You know, what punishment could happen to those people who really will abuse my records? If I couldn't even find out if someone really could know my address, my telephone number, because actually in this case, when my information in the spine, everyone in the NHS will be able to access it.
But I mean, okay, so let's get into the real world a little bit. I mean, most people in this country have their names on an electoral register and their addresses and so on. So, I mean, there is a lot of different sources for fundamental information about who lives where, etc. I think the issue that we have is about any kind of personal details relating to, you know, your health condition or whatever. But, I mean, there is a lot of information out there about individuals, telephone directories or whatever. It's not like this is the first source of a public domain piece of information, maybe. But I mean, I don't know whether you have comments on this.
I would just say that I think GP practice have a huge responsibility here. I know that we suggested in Scotland, for example, that practices put out messages on the right-hand side of the prescription, so every single person that got a repeat prescription would have an extra chance to be told about it. And when I was thinking about people on witness protection schemes, I was thinking that the GPs would opt them out, so that the practice has got a bit of a responsibility to maybe bring that to people's awareness if they know there are people with particularly sensitive diagnoses or conditions that, you know, it's a lot more than just getting one letter and having one chance. And I guess it depends on how well you know your patients. But
can I just reassure you about something? I mean, there's nothing, as the gentleman said, I mean, nothing's 100%, but on top of the data side, the data security, there is a huge bureaucracy anybody has to go through to get access to any patient information. I mean, I run studies across the UK now for pharmaceutical research companies and things like that, where without that data, the pharmaceutical companies cannot optimize their drug regimes, cannot develop new drugs. They just don't have access to that information. You'd think that a big pharmaceutical company could just go in there and, you know, give somebody some money like these guys are sitting here and say, you know, give us that data. It's just not like that.
How much money are we talking?
Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. But there is a huge bureaucracy, and we go through a whole range of contracts with a lot of legal clauses in there to get the data, where liabilities and responsibilities are put in certain places to make sure people. There are all sorts of administrative processes, both e-processes and documentation. In terms of ethical approval for those things, we have to sit in front of an ethical committee which has 18 people on it, and we have to get a certificate and license to do that. And at every stage there is monitoring that the people are doing the right things. And then after all of that, there's somebody that comes in and audits, and even the company the customer may come in and audit to make sure that you're not putting them at risk. So if we do one of these things, we're really in for a very, very laborious time to actually get to that information. But the information is so valuable. Remember, this doesn't have your name and address on it. There's no patient label. This is part of the contract, and legals on this is to remove all that information. So all we have is the pure data. And, you know, I know it's difficult to see from outside, but there's a huge amount that goes on within the NHS system to protect the patient. And a lot of people involved in that. I mentioned earlier to one of the panel members that in the NHS today there are 3,000 people in the NHS who all they do for a living is manage that process of governance in relation to the use of patient data which has not got the patient label on it. 3,000 people, and that just shows the volume of data and the utility that that data has.
I don't know whether... thank you. It's Paul Davis from Greater Manchester Commission Business Service again. Just touching upon that, I don't know whether the audience are aware of something called the Pseudonymisation Implementation Project. This is Connecting for Health. It's a bit of a mouthful, I know, but it's a Connecting for Health project which has been pushed out across the NHS, and the whole of the NHS has to be compliant at the end of this financial year. Specifically, where there are secondary uses of data, of which there are in commissioning, and certainly some of the research topics, it's making sure we've got safe havens, a number of regions, so each SHA region has one which is actually adding more control and security to that data. It also touches upon the comment that the gentleman said at the front around having the opt-in, opt-out is just the beginning of the process. He described the fact that it's the beginning of the architecture process. This isn't a technical architecture that I think we're discussing here. It's actually a business architecture, and it's completely imperative that we actually understand the business processes under which we're controlling the flows of information. Technical solutions alone aren't going to solve the problems.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any more comments, or should we go on to the next question?
Could I just make a very brief comment, which is, I'm not a doctor, so but I did have a previous life as a clinical risk manager and know the consent process quite well. But I was always told that consent is only given when it's informed. And what I'm struggling to hear is the benefits and risk argument in relation to how do we inform people that actually it is in their interest, I suspect, to have this data. And yes, there are risks around people accessing, and yes, 1 in a million people might be targeted because of some breach or whatever, but actually this is going to save people's lives. And the data which we are getting now is highlighting significant gaps in care. It's highlighting significant issues around clinical performance. It's highlighting a whole range of things that we've never known about, because all of this stuff has been stuck in back offices and nobody's thought to want to look. And so I really do think it's not whether it's in or out, it's about how people make informed choices.
Okay, could we go on to the online communities question? And I think the question was about if there is a community, particularly in a particular themed area, like people who have diabetes, or I think the example was maternity, how does the primary care trust or the health system get benefit out of that information? I think that was the question, really, and how does it interact with that community? Does anybody?
Oh, yeah, it's the new world. I mean, when you think about it, I think, how many of you are GPs or primary care physicians? You've probably had a little bit of experience with patients coming in saying, I read this on the internet, and I think what I need is, right? I mean, that's already happening. And so I think the peer support model that the lady was mentioning, I think is one of those things that actually can add value, but also can be detrimental. I see us as ultimately, once we get our personal health record system, we will start moving towards more integration or at least linkages with those kind of support systems online, and use them. I mean, I think one of the things that's missing in a lot of those is that you'll get people who will espouse opinions. You have no idea the credibility of the people on those, but people are going to use them anyway. And so if this is just another piece of data that a client or a patient comes in with, you want to be able to manage that as much as possible and to say, no, this is true, this is not true, that's a wives' tale. You've had it before where people come in and say, I knew a guy who told me that this was the best treatment for me. No, it's not. And it really speaks to the nature of the relationship between the patient and the provider. What we're getting away from, thankfully, is this kind of parental model of healthcare to a collaborative model where, and that's what I want. I tell you, when I'm a patient, I want I do not want to go in and have the doc tell me what to do, but nor do I want the doc to say, I'll do whatever you want. I want your expert knowledge, but I also want to have a say in that decision-making. That's the dance. And this is just another part of that dance, I think.